Hello and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to Instant Deck Techs. In this series we go over everything you need to build a certain commander. We'll go over the strategies and the types of cards needed you need to get the deck working. Any cards we mention will be down in the description below. In this video we're going to be looking at Baeloth Barrityl, Entertainer, and Raised by Giants. Baeloth is 4 and a red for a 2/5 legendary creature elf shaman. It has creatures your opponents control with power less than Baeloth's power are goaded, which means they attack each combat if able and attack a player other than you if able. It also has, whenever a goaded attacking or blocking creature dies, you create a treasure token, and choose a background. The background we've chosen is Raised by Giants, which is 5 and a green for legendary enchantment background. It has, commander creatures you own have base power and toughness 10/10 and are giants in addition to their other types. Because our commander is red and our background is green, it means the colour identity of our deck is going to be Gruul. Before we go over our individual sections, let's go over what this deck is trying to do and also how it wins. This is going to be a bit of a forced combat deck, with Baeloth and a few other cards we making our opponents attack each other. We'll also be gifting them all some creatures, so that this can all happen a little bit quicker. We'll also have some protection effects for Baeloth and for our own life total, in case any opponent tries to mess things up for us. To win the game, we cast Baeloth, which by itself goads all our opponent's creatures with power 1. The next turn, we then play Raised by Giants, which then goads all creatures our opponents control with power 9 or less. Meaning all of our opponent's creatures will have to start hitting each other. When the dust has settled, we'll then pick the last player off with our 10/10 commander. First in our sections is the forced combat effects. What we're looking for is effects that either force our opponents to attack each other or heavily incentivize them to do so. First up is some more goad effects. There is a good number of these out there, and I think they all do a very solid job. Cards like Bloodthirsty Blade and Shiny and Predatory Impetus are effectively removal spells for our opponent's best creatures, as they'll never be attacking us. Then cards like Agitator Ant, Disrupt Decorum, and Geode Rager, which can goad a whole host of creatures, are the exact backup and redundancy that we need for our commander. Next up are just cards that make everyone attack. These are definitely a bit more all-in, and will mean you'll need to rely on some protection effects that we'll get onto in a little bit. If you're a fan of some added chaos in a commander game, then these are some great additions. A bit less all-in, but still impactful, is cards that incentivize our opponents to attack, either by rewarding them with things like Curse of Opulence and Curse of Bounty, or by making the creatures they are attacking with better when they attack an opponent. You have things like Frontier Warmonger, Frenzied Saddlebrute, and Death Kiss for this. Another way to get our opponents to attack each other and make our commander better when we goad all our opponents' boards are by giving them some creatures. First up, we have Hunted Troll and Hunted Dragon. These both give an opponent some creatures they can start swinging with, while also leaving us something decent behind. Then we have Varchild, Betrayer of Kjeldor, which can give an opponent loads of tokens, and what's very nice is that if it dies, we get them back. Tahngarth First Mate does it a little bit differently, in that it's a creature that we control, but because it just loves a fight so much, when an opponent attacks, it can go and pile in. What's fun is that it can do it at every combat step on everyone's turn. Then there's a card like Rite of the Raging Storm, which gives everyone a 5/1 on their turn, which importantly can't attack you. And then one of the best versions of this effect out there for the deck is Sylvan Offering. Dump all your mana into it to give you and an opponent a board state, knowing that with our commander, none of the creatures will ever be attacking us. Lastly, we have my favourite of these effects, mainly because it looks like my cat. We have Hungry Lynx. This gives tokens to an opponent while also growing itself and getting more powerful. This is a deck that really does need some protection. We need to protect our own life total with all the forced combat effects, and then we also need to protect our commander, as if it sticks around long enough it can win us the game. First up we have some creatures that make our opponents not want to attack us. Hornet Nest can happily get under a big bus and then spit out a load of Death Touch tokens. We then have Kazuul, which means that unless an opponent has mana or creatures bigger than 3/3s, they can't really attack us. For some other cool effects, we have Crawl Space, which means only 2 creatures can attack us, and then we have Caltrops, which means attacking with small tokens is almost impossible. Then to give us a board state, as well as protection from any flyers, we have Sandworm Convergence. And after that, we have cards that I don't recommend too often, but in this deck I think could do a really good job, and that's some fog effects that stop all combat damage in a turn. These can be really great if our commander ever gets removed, as they can buy us an extra turn to rebuild. Of these, I would only want the ones that have additional effects, like Winds of Kalsima, Arachnogenesis, and Jaheira's Respite. I personally wouldn't just play a fog for the sake of playing a fog. It's still 2022, cards need to do more. And then for protecting Baeloth, we have cards like Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots, which make it harder for it to remove. You have cards like Heroic Intervention, which can protect a whole board on a turn. Then you have cards like Joriel's Favour, which can give our commander Regenerate to help save it, and then Darksteel Plate can give it Indestructible to make it even harder to remove. Moving over to our card draw, we have a number of different ways that we can take it. First up is on a card such as Wall of Blossoms. I think this will do a very solid job at protecting our life total while also helping us dig into our deck a little bit. Also, the fact it has Defender means that it'll never have to attack with any of our forced combat spells. Then we have the always solid Harmonise for when in your green deck you need to draw 3 cards. After that, we can add the politics of a game and hopefully get people attacking a little bit more by adding the monarchy to the game, allowing the person who is the monarch to draw a card at the end of their turn. Once it's reached the late game and we have all of our opponent's creatures goaded with Baeloth and no creatures can attack us, it means we're basically guaranteed never to lose the monarchy. And then finally for card draw, we have spells that draw us cards equal to the power of the largest creature that we control, which with Raised by Giants and our commander will be at least 10. Moving over to our ramp, it's going to be really important to run a minimum of 8 bits here, as we really want to be playing Baeloth at least by turn 5 and Raised by Giants at least by turn 6, but the earlier we get them out, the better. As we have green, we'll start with the classic ramp and growth effects, the 2-drop lands out of our deck. The reprint of Nature's Law should make it nice and cheap, and is a good example of premium ramp as it can get any dual lands that we might be running out of the deck. The main rocks I would consider on a reasonable budget would be Sol Ring and Arcane Signet, as they're just very good at ramping us in the case of Sol Ring, and ramping and fixing in the case of Arcane Signet. Moving over to some more spicy ramp, we first have Coveted Jewel. For 6 mana it draws us 3 cards and taps for 3 mana of any one colour. Normally in a game of Commander it can get stolen, but in this deck with our Commander out and it goading everything else, we should have no issues keeping hold of it. And then because Baeloth also makes treasure whenever a goaded attacking or blocking creature dies, we can also run Zorn to double that production up so we get even more treasure tokens. Then like the card draw, we have a card like Transverse the Outlands, which gets basic lands out of our deck equal to the power of a creature that we control. Again, most of the time this will be at least 10. And then lastly, similar to Wall of Blossoms in the card draw, we have some ramp spells on walls. They can hold the board down from any attackers while ramping us ahead to set up our win. When it comes to interaction, as always you want to be starting with at least 8 bits and then going up from there, depending on your playgroup. Gruul has plenty of ways of killing things, but I prioritise cards that deal with the widest range of threats possible. So classics like Hull Breach, Beast Within and Chaos Warp, along with the new Wild Magic Surge. Red also has plenty of good budget board wipes out there, with Chandra's Ignition probably being the standout, as again our commander will be huge. One green board wipe I also like the look of is Rampage of the Clans. This kills off any artifacts and enchantments, and importantly gives everyone a bunch of 3/3 tokens that they can start attacking each other with. Moving over to winning the game, we have a couple of cool bits that we can use. First up is suiting up Baeloth so we can swing through for the 21 points of commander damage you need to win a game. I'd start off looking to give it some form of evasion for cheap, with Rancor giving it trample being an absolute favourite of mine. I don't think you need many of these effects, but there is just a whole heap of options out there for you to consider. There's even some cards that can give it unblockable, like Prowler's Helm and Whisperswilt Cloak. Then giving Baeloth Double Strike means that if everything is going to plan, it's dealing at least 20 damage, which is really scary for our opponents, as they're going to be too busy fighting amongst themselves. Talking of, Vengeful Ancestor will ping a player whenever they attack with a goaded creature, which, given all the creatures we'll be gifting, as well as everything else our opponents will naturally be playing, should add up to a fair chunk of damage. Then we have Bothersome Quasit, which as well as being another way of goading creatures, also makes all goaded creatures not be able to block. This means maximum damage for our opponents when they're swinging at each other, because they're not going to be able to block. But it also means they won't be able to block our creatures either, making that win for us all the easier. For some haymaker win out of nowhere cards, we have the new Spectacular Showdown and the granddaddy of win on the spot, Insurrection. Perfect for when you just want that commander game to end. Then one last pet card of mine that if you haven't tried you're really missing out on, and that's Vicious Shadows. 6 and a red for an enchantment that has, whenever a creature dies, you may have it deal damage to target player equal to the number of cards in that player's hands. It doesn't even have to be the player whose creatures died, it's any player. So many things will be dying in commander games where you're playing this deck, that Vicious Shadows will just throw around a ton of damage. Rounding off the deck with some utility lands, as with 2 colours we can have a nice little selection. Starting off with lands that don't tap for coloured mana, Rogue's Passage will mean that our commander, or our opponent's best creatures, can get through unblocked. Kessid's Wolf Run can also buff up a creature and give it trample. Then we have Maze of Ith, which can protect us in case any opponent's creatures slip through towards us. And then as this deck revolves a lot around the commander, we can run Command Beacon to get it back a little bit cheaper if it ever costs too much to cast. Then we can also run the Hideaway lands, which should be really easy to activate in this deck, as we'll have huge creatures and we'll be throwing around plenty of damage. The rest of your mana base will be very dependent on what you have available to you. We recently released a video with some advice on building a deck with a budget mana base, which might be of help. Until next time, please like, share and subscribe, and let us know down in the comments if there are any commanders you'd like to see a deck tech on. Thank you very much for watching.